Hello, everyone. Welcome to our event. On behalf of YWC Edmonton and the Searching for Izena project, I want to warmly welcome you to today's panel discussion about the fascinating and somewhat untold history of female leadership at Calgary City Hall. My name is Sathara Naidu. I am an undergraduate student at the University of Alberta, Campus Saint-Jean, studying political science and history, and I am also a member of the Searching for Izena steering committee and also one of the researchers on the project. You may be asking yourself, who the heck is Izena and why are we looking for her? And secondly, why is an Edmonton organization hosting an event about female leadership at Calgary City Hall? I'll get to that in a minute, but before I begin, I want to respectfully acknowledge that I am joining you today from Edmonton, Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for the diverse Indigenous peoples of this region, including the Cree, Métis, Blackfoot, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures shape our vibrant community. I would also like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that many of you are joining us from the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, which is comprised of the Siksika, Piikani, Kainai, and Tsuut'ina nations, as well as which are the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. So thank you again for joining us virtually, and we are so happy to have you here. The Searching for Izena project is proud to host today's conversation because we are not only celebrating the 100th anniversary of the first woman, Izena Ross, being elected to the City of Edmonton Council, but our volunteers are working hard at work to find ways to encourage more women to seek public office and roles at decision-making tables across our communities and around our province. As many of you know, 2021 is a municipal election year in Alberta, and we're interested in finding out more about the history of female leadership at Calgary City Hall. In total, both Edmonton and Calgary have only elected 31 members each to serve their cities. 31 each. Just let those numbers sink in a little bit. And compare it to the more than 300 men who have been elected to sit on Calgary City Council, or the 238 men that have served at the municipal level in Edmonton. One more stat to consider is that Edmonton has only ever elected one woman to serve as mayor and 0 women of color to their council. And Calgary has never elected a woman at the top job at City Hall either. During today's panel discussion, we have invited the representatives from Heritage Calgary and Ask Her YYC to introduce us to some of Calgary's past female leaders, including Annie Gale, who made history in 1917 by becoming the first woman to be elected to a municipal body in Canada. We will also learn about how the 2021 municipal election is shaping up in Calgary when it comes to electing more women to serve at City Hall. Will Calgary finally pull ahead of Edmonton when it comes to electing more women to council, or will the capital city win out in 2021? Some more friendly sister city competition. To help guide today's important and timely conversation, we've asked Kelly Cryderman, the Globe and Mail's Calgary-based columnist and reporter, to serve as our moderator. Kelly hails from Edmonton originally and is a longtime and respected political observer in our province. Her bio has been posted in the chat box below, which you can read. She will be guiding this discussion between Asia Walker, the Heritage Resources and Research Coordinator for Heritage Calgary, and Helen Cashman, the Chair of Events and Programming at Ask Her YYC. So thank you everyone for joining us, and Kelly, over to you to get us started. Thank you.
Thanks so much for the introduction, and I'm so happy to be here and be part of the discussion, be part of a thoughtful discussion on why it's important to have more women elected to municipal office. And first, I will introduce Asia Walker from Heritage Calgary and Helen Cashman from Ask Her YYC, and I'm going to let the both of them describe their work, starting with Asia.
Hi, Kelly. Yeah, thanks so much for having us here today. We're really excited to attend. I started digging into this work about the women who have served on Calgary City Council several months ago, actually, when I first heard about the Searching for Izena project. It is municipal election year in the city of Calgary, and I wondered what information was floating around out there. And I'm so excited to share some of the findings about some of the women with you today. Heritage Calgary is a civic partner. We are a nonprofit civic partner to the city of Calgary. Our mandate is to inform mayor and council about all matters pertaining to heritage in the city of Calgary. A lot of that focus is on our inventory of historic resources. We have about 900 properties across the city of Calgary that have historical relevance that are for the betterment of all Calgarians. That is what they're technically identified as. And we're trying to broaden and diversify what that inventory looks like. Inventory is my foundational job. That is what I'm mostly responsible for doing. But a lot of the information about these women have kind of come out in the research of those historic buildings as well. So again, really excited to be here today. I have my shout out to Madam Premier, my women's places in council chambers and all levels of politics. So I'm really excited to be here today. Thanks for having us.
And Helen.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm joining from Ask Her, which was an organization founded just before the previous municipal election. And we're focused on advancing the representation of women within municipal leadership, including at the city council level. And we're looking to have a city council that, actually looks like the city of Calgary and reflects that. And so one of the big ways that we've been focusing on doing that over the last couple of years is by providing programs and training for women who are considering running for office. So last year we had 2 programs that we ran, Prepare Her and Mentor Her. Prepare Her was an intensive 8-week program where we looked at every aspect of campaigning from, what are your values? What's your brand? How do you fundraise? What do you do with your data that you collect? How do you talk to the media? Everything that you could want to know and probably a bit more. And then Mentor Her was a shorter program, but provided an opportunity for women to speak with experienced politicians and ask questions on their mind to really get a sense of, what's it like? What's the job actually like? And is this something I'm interested in? So we had 60 women participate in those programs. Super happy to see many of them are now running as candidates or supporting those running as candidates. And we're excited to see that translate into some impact in the upcoming election. And yeah, we also do, a few other public events to look at addressing those barriers. But kind of all things women in municipal politics is what we're all about.
And Asia, I think it's really important that we know our history before we can go forward. And you have been really focused on that. And I'm wondering if you can tell us about the 31 women who have served on Calgary City Council before and what we can take from their experience so far.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll just start by saying, while we are tied at Calgary and Edmonton at 31 women having been elected, technically only 30 women have actually served on city council in Calgary. There was a bit of drama in the 2004 election, which we can talk about later if we want to. But one of those women did step down actually, and was replaced by Andre Chabot, who generally well-known name. I think he's running for council again this time around, actually. And so 30 women have served, 31 women have been elected. So that kind of step over the line to have gained the acclamation of your fellow citizens and said, yes, I'd like you to serve us. That has been achieved, and it has been 30 women who have actually gone ahead and then served on council. It's very interesting. The first woman was mentioned before, Annie Gale, was elected in 1917. And while we have never had a female mayor, she was allegedly, mythologically, the first woman in Canada to actually serve as an acting mayor. This happened in 1923. And so we proudly claim her as that. And there is rumor that she was actually the first female to serve on any municipal council in the entire British Empire. So that's a little bit of a claim to fame.
Wow.
I have been, in looking around, I haven't actually found anything to actually validate that. That sounds like a doctoral thesis, maybe later down the road. But that is something that we proudly claim. And Annie Gale's name is on boardrooms at the City of Calgary. Her name's on a school here in the City of Calgary as well. No statues or any sort of, real robust celebration of this massive achievement, but definitely something that she achieved at such a early age of Calgary being such a young city, and something that we are certainly still proud of. And I guess I'll just say, just before we really dive into a few of the selected women that we want to talk about today, we've never achieved parity on council. The closest we ever have come to parity is 6 women and 8 men out of a 14-member council, but men have always outnumbered women on Calgary City Council. We never got to that mythical 50%. So we hope that that will happen. It could potentially happen this year, which is very exciting. So keep your eyes open and keep watch for what happens in October.
And just going back to the fascinating Annie Gale for a moment, can you tell us a little bit about what drove her to run in the first place?
Yeah, definitely. So Annie Gale was an immigrant. She came to Calgary with her husband, William Gale, who was a civil engineer. Early on, it moved to Calgary in 1912, just as the city was starting its first real boom. William joined the City of Calgary Engineering Department and eventually became assistant city engineer. So he was the instigator of actually bringing Annie and their 2 young sons to Calgary. When Annie got here, she was mortified by the food quality and the lack of food security that was available in this kind of bustling, booming or new metropolis that Calgary was. Calgary merchants held contracts with British Columbia growers, and they would not sell vegetables or any produce that was produced by local farmers. Shipping vegetables, as you can imagine, over the Rocky Mountains resulted in really expensive produce and of really poor quality. Didn't have the refrigeration system at the time, obviously. So by the time it got here to Calgary, a lot of it was really degraded. I read a quote from her somewhere: "It's not fit for the horses back in the old country." So, and yet these were, really expensive products that were, the only really nourishing food available to Calgarians at the time. So she joined the Women's Consumers League, and and part of that was starting to grow those connections between local merchants and the city. So she became this kind of unstoppable force in this Consumers League. And when the public market was established, right in the downtown Calgary, it used to be at the corner of 3rd Street and 4th Avenue Southeast. The Consumers League set up a stall of locally produced produce with cost savings that they passed on directly onto the consumer. She also was responsible for the creation of the Vacant Lots Garden Club. So anywhere in the city where there was a vacant lot, this team would go out and plant localized produce. They focused a lot on potatoes. They took really well in the soil, and it was really easy to get a really robust crop out of that. In 1917, there were over 6,000 potato plots in the city alone. So it really helped secure that food at a higher quality than what was originally, available before she really came in and got involved. And just as an interesting side note, that vacant lot, the one that she originally set up, is actually designated in Calgary as a municipal historic resource. It's in Bridgeland Riverside, the historic community of Bridgeland Riverside, and is still used as a garden to this day. So that continued sort of intangible heritage is connected to Annie Gale as well. So those are really, those things that really kind of motivated her. A lot of these women, all of them really, were very active members of their community, highly engaged volunteers, and really that foundational desire to do good and better their community was really what drove them in the end to seek a position on City Council.
Now, in your notes for this session, you've highlighted a few women who've sat on City Council who you find really fascinating. And you talk about Mary Dover, who you describe as a total boss. Why was she a total boss?
Mary Dover was the legitimate definition of a total boss. She was born the same day that Alberta joined Confederation in 1905 and came from a long line of Albertans that helped shape past, present, and even the future of this province and our city. Her grandfather was Lieutenant Colonel James McLeod, who helped found and name Fort Calgary in 1875. And her father was Alfred Ernest Cross, better known as A.E. Cross, one of the Big Four, who helped found the Stampede, Calgary Stampede, in 1912. She was married to a Grant Dover. He was an auto executive, and they traveled all over Southeast Asia and settled in Ceylon, where she gave birth to their only child. Travels were interrupted by the outbreak of World War II, where they both then returned to Calgary to continue to help with the war efforts there. She was a very fine horsewoman, had a life of leisure growing up. She was an extra in Hollywood films that were filmed in Calgary. And at that outbreak of the war, she began volunteer work for the war effort as a recruiting officer for the Calgary Women's Army Corporation, or Corps, so the CWAC. She, in the end, was promoted herself. She became a lieutenant and was, really strongly participating as in this volunteer role throughout the entirety of the war. Now, she was very interested in politics. Once the war ended, she began her interest in politics with a run for a seat in Parliament under the Liberal Party in 1947. She ended up being unsuccessful there, but it did leave her available and open to run and leave her mark on the city of Calgary. So she ran, she was in office for from 1949 to 1953, and again from 1956 to 1959. And some of her initiatives when she was in office, she supported the ending of practice of operating kindergartens in private homes. At the time, it was very poorly regulated. And so she wanted to make sure that that level of public health was still there. She supported a notice of motion calling for the scrapping of Calgary's proportional representation system. And she supported the largest tree planting program in the history of the city, over almost $37,000 to provide the planting of 5,000 trees and 5,000 shrubs on all of our city boulevards. So her legacy can still be seen today across the city, which is very interesting.
Wow, trees and proportional representation. That's
yeah.
That's a lot of bread. Vernetta Anderson broke multiple barriers as the first Black councillor at Calgary City Hall. What can you tell us about her?
Yeah, Vernetta Anderson is phenomenal. So she served on council 1974 to 1977, and she was the first Black city councillor, female city councillor in Calgary. She was married to Ezra Sugarfoot Anderson. For all of you Calgary Stampeder fans, that name should ring a bell. He was drafted by the Calgary Stampeders and broke barriers himself. He was one of the first Black players in professional football in Canada, but also, more broadly across North America. He was also the only player, little fact for your trivia, once the bars reopen here, Ezra was the only player to wear the 00 for the Calgary Stampeders. So that's like cool claim to fame for him. He retired in 1955 and went on to become a mechanic, while Vernetta decided to move in and start entering politics. She moved to Calgary in 1952 to support Sugarfoot's football career. And when she got here, she became deeply involved in church and community services throughout Calgary. She served a ton of roles. She was the president of the Calgary United Church Women. She was a member of the Mount Royal College Ladies Auxiliary. She co-founded and became president of Meals on Wheels. Again, outstanding legacy that continues to today. And was a volunteer board member on several different organizations, Calgary Tourist and Convention Association and the Calgary Center for Performing Arts, which is really fantastic. When she got elected, one of the hot button topics of the time was this massive annexation that the city was considering. It would have brought in 125 square miles of additional land into the city limits, expanding the city north and northeast, as well as south and southeast, north, northwest and south, southeast. Calgary at the time was only 157 square miles, and so it would almost have doubled the size of the city. It's so funny that we are always having these same discussions, right? How far should Calgary grow? Where should they grow? And so obviously all councillors at that time, potential councillors included, were expected to have some sort of position. And she did not support this. It was her personal position that Calgary shouldn't grow that much so fast. And the question was actually ended up putting to a plebiscite at the time. 77% of voters said, hell no, that's too much land in one go. And Vernetta actually then spent some of her time on city council supporting smaller, more thoughtful annexation. So that land is all now in the city of Calgary, but it didn't grow as fast and as rapidly as it might have in some other time. So that's a cool legacy of Vernetta for sure, that it continues to today as well. And her name recently in 2020, she has a boardroom at the Calgary Municipal building as well, the Vernetta Anderson Hall.
And the fourth woman councillor that you've highlighted is Yvonne Fritz, who I remember from her days in provincial politics, which I think came after her time in municipal politics.
Yeah, Yvonne started in municipal politics at the city council level in 1989. She was born in 1950 in Saskatoon and married Lanny Fritz. Before entering politics, she was a registered nurse at the Calgary General Hospital, and she was a RN there for 20 years. So very similar to a current serving councillor, Councillor Diane Colley-Urquhart, who is also a registered nurse and has that very strong and proud history of public health under her belt. Yvonne was really interested in ensuring that a 24-hour emergency care was available at the Peter Lougheed Hospital. At the time, the hospital was new and it was only offering 12-hour care, so like 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. If you had an emergency outside of those hours, how dare you, you were shuffled into an ambulance and sent off to another hospital nearby, which really kind of increased your risk. There was a story in the newspapers in the 80s about a boy who was stung by a wasp and had an allergic reaction and couldn't get into the hospital. And nobody really knew where to send him or where to go. And Yvonne was very upset about this. And so she campaigned on this. She kept instilling the importance when she was on council. And in the end, 24-hour care was passed at Peter Lougheed Hospital and integrated in there. As you know, I mean, as anyone in Calgary knows, Peter Lougheed Centre today is an exceptionally important part of our healthcare network. Without 24-hour care, we would be in a really difficult position. So her advocacy of making sure that public health was respected and upheld for the citizens of the Northeast, especially at that time, was really a phenomenal lasting legacy for her.
It's really striking that for all these women, it seemed like there were particular issues, outstanding issues that drove them into politics. And I wonder if that stands in contrast for the reason that men get into politics. Do we have any idea about whether there's a difference between what motivates men and women to get into politics and whether that has been different in history?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that anyone can run for office for any variety of reasons, but the common themes that I found in the research throughout the women were, again, those, how do I better my community? How can I better society as a whole? That was really the things that drove them to actually seek these positions on city council. You know, whether it's food security or you know, even alleviating traffic congestion, that was a big one. It's actually funny how often they kind of dovetail with urban planning issues. Mary Dover, for instance, one of the things that she campaigned on was getting an incinerator for the city of Calgary dump, because at the time it was just burned. And it was, I read an article in like 1949 Maclean's magazine about how this aura and this aroma held over, sat over Calgary all the time. And we liked it because it showed that we were burning our oil. But really it was a dump burning in the east part of the city. And because we didn't have a proper way of, you know, disposing of our garbage. So she campaigned for that. She also campaigned for the elimination of narrow bridges. That was a big thing at the time. Yeah, so a lot of them were these civic planning, urban planning issues that affected women, maybe even more so than they do men, right? I mean, women, even today, we know women take multiple trips where men may take only one in a day to and from the office, whereas women are dropping children off, they are picking up groceries, they're visiting elderly parents. So they interact with the city a lot more. And I think that there's definitely something to be said about that. So
yeah, I certainly think about Annie Gale and being interested in the produce quality for the city, and I'm sure she was doing the shopping for her family, so she was paying attention to that more than anyone. One thing you have you've noted in old articles, what have you discovered? And I'm interested in this as a newspaper reporter. How were the women covered by the media when they got involved in politics and as they ran campaigns?
Yeah, it's funny, you know, and as we've started this research during a pandemic, a lot of the research archives that have been available to us has been online. And we're really fortunate that the Calgary Herald newspapers have all been digitized and documented. So that's been a real strong source of our research and our ability to actually dig into it. There are fonds, historical archives that are buried away in, at the University of Calgary in the Glenbow collection that we haven't had access to yet. We do hope to find out more information when things do open up. However, the newspapers are a really interesting place to go because there's always been a City Hall reporter who would sit in on committee meetings or council meetings and report, maybe even verbatim sometimes back to their readers, what was said and what was done and different policies that were made, et cetera, at council. And it's so funny just to read, now, some of the ways that the women spoke in council versus their men. The men would, declaim robustly, whereas the women would say something icily or snidely or cattily, and these like imaginary conflicts between multiple women who may have been on council at the same time. I mean, I don't know how much of it I buy. There might have been some, discrepancies in the past, but just the language and the verbiage that is used to describe how the women spoke in council. The other thing that is interesting that we noted is that pretty much every woman, when they were publicized in the paper about running for council, they were to a T always described as housewives. I mean, Vernetta Anderson was the United Fund director in 1974, and she was identified in the papers as a housewife, whereas all these men had their, formal titles. If they had degrees or letters after their names, those were all listed, and it was just Vernetta Anderson, a housewife, or Yvonne Fritz. She was a nurse, and by the 80s, it was a little bit better. But yeah, from the beginning, it's very interesting the verbiage and the tone used to describe these women in the papers.
Yes, I do wonder about how the media created barriers for women running, whether intentional or not. And, the barriers that existed to women running for political office in decades past, how those extend to today as well. And maybe this is where you and Helen can both discuss what are the barriers that women face in getting into municipal office, past and present.
Well, I think I'll just, before I pass it off to Helen, because the modern barriers, I'm sure, are very parallel and are similar to some of the things faced in the past. Vernetta Anderson actually credits her campaign manager, who was an ex-Stampeder himself, Herm Harrison. She credited him for actually, spearheading her campaign and driving her campaign forward. So there was a man, an ex-Stampeder, who believed in her and believed in her enough to really help push her campaign ahead. She also really credited the people working for her with her win. I mean, but you have to see, like, the active participation of these women at the volunteer and community level. I mean, they were really well-known names, right? However, that step, to, well, you're at home with children, you can volunteer, but how can you sit on council? I mean, those questions were asked for sure, and I'm sure that those questions are still asked today. Helen, I don't know if you want to jump in and talk more about the barriers that are faced today, but I can imagine a lot of them are quite similar to barriers that were faced in the past.
Yeah, and I actually love the point that you've made about her campaign manager, because we actually see that being one of the really positive things that can overcome the barriers. And that's why our organization is called Ask Her, is actually having that encouragement for women who are considering running. We know that women need to be asked more times before they accept. So I'm sure, her campaign manager back in the day plays a very similar role to folks in the community who are asking women to run today. So I think that's a really positive sign of how those can be overcome. We've been looking into this because we're really interested as an organization in understanding what those root causes are so that we can tackle those. And when we were speaking with women in our Prepare Her and Mentor Her programs, we asked this question about, what is holding you back right now from running? and from making that leap. And so there were 5, kind of buckets of things that we heard. The first was, and probably the one that came up the most, was just concerns about harassment and what that could mean. We also saw, personal financial situation, and also, concerns about the ability to fundraise being another big one. Access to childcare was a huge one. This perception of, not knowing what you needed to know to run, or just feeling like you're not in the right rooms, that, politics is still kind of this old boys club, and you're not really sure if you have mentors who can help you access that. And then the last was, much more around self-doubt that women are experiencing. So happy to, to dive into any of these in more depth. But I think there's a few barriers, and I think they've probably changed over time. But I think there's probably some that have remained pretty consistent.
Well, I'm interested in that last point of yours, Helen. Do we have any idea whether anybody can have self-doubt? Is that an issue that affects women who are considering running in politics more than men, do you think?
Yeah, so I mean, I think if you look kind of at the parallel in industry research about women applying for jobs, and you'll see that, men will apply for jobs when they meet 60% of the criteria, and women need to feel like they check all of the boxes. And I think that really plays into politics, especially because, what are the qualifications to be a politician? It's a pretty open-ended question. And so that's actually one of the gaps with Prepare Her that we're looking to bridge, because it's going to be a while before that shifts at a societal level. But how we were looking at it with Prepare Her is, okay, well, if women are saying they need to know 100% of the things before they start the campaign, then great, we're going to make sure you know 100% of things and can check those boxes, and we'll feel confident. Even if you could have been successful only knowing 60%, if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. And I think we just see with other things around impostor syndrome impacting women more than men. I think we see that as a major consideration that really does skew and hold women back from making the leap, even if they are super qualified. All of the women that we worked with in our programs, whenever I would see their bios, and sometimes you'd see comments online about, why do you have an organization that needs to increase women? Like, just let the most qualified person win. And you look at those bios, and I just want to say, like, how can you say these women are not qualified? And Asia, the women that you were running through had been on council. I mean, super, super qualified. It's these other factors that are preventing them from putting their name on the ballot. So
one thing that's striking to me about municipal politics in Alberta, it is nonpartisan. There are no party affiliations. And to me, that could be an opening for a lot of women to get into politics who aren't interested necessarily in partisan politics. At the same time, it maybe points to a weakness that you pointed out, that this lack of campaign knowledge or access to political networks. How does a woman go about building a network when they're considering running for municipal politics, when there is no party affiliation, when they just need to build an organization that is nonpartisan for a municipal run?
Yeah, I think one of the ways that women can be successful in doing that is a lot of the candidates who run for city council have experience with volunteering or different community groups and organizations, and that allows you to build that name recognition, within your community, and start to meet folks and just have a little bit of a profile when you choose to make the leap. And so I think there's positives and negatives to it, because, on the partisan side, parties also have a role in identifying candidates and ensuring and aiming to get more women to run, but that isn't the case at the municipal level. But I do think, there are ways, because it's a smaller area that you're representing versus, the provincial or federal ridings. So there is a chance to really, through community volunteering and meeting folks, to build up that name recognition.
I'll just say too, sorry, go ahead, Kelly.
Sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that there is, although today there is no kind of higher level endorsement of candidates by other levels of government. There is a strong history of that throughout Alberta, but especially I know for sure in Calgary. I mean, Mary Dover was elected in 1949 as part of the Civic Government Association. It was a municipal party that endorsed candidates. And those organizations were typically supported by higher levels of higher jurisdictions of government. Found an ad from the CGA. It says, "We're neither a faith nor a political party. It is simply a tag by which you can recognize a good man who has the trust and respect of a very large number of his fellow citizens and may be well trusted by all of them, whether they know him well or not." So some of them skewed progressive, some of them skewed more conservative, but they would endorse slates of candidates, and generally those slates were kind of brought into government depending on, you know, the way the wind was blowing that year at the election. So that's is an interesting thing that we've lost. Maybe there's a little bit of, I would say, like a soupçon of that coming back in the last little while, but you see colors of campaign signs and stuff like that. But yeah, it's an interesting part of the past that we've, I think, for the betterment of elections, lost in the current discourse around municipal elections.
And what about fundraising? I think that's a part of politics that you don't really think of unless you are in politics, but it's, of course, it ends up being a very important part of the machine. Is there a barrier, a specific barrier that women face when it comes to fundraising, Helen?
Yeah, so that was another one of the top concerns identified by our participants, was this like concern about their ability to fundraise for their campaign. I think there's two elements to that. One, there's like a kind of a personal financial component of, how much can you donate, which I think is influenced a little bit by just the gender wage gap is going to play out there. If you are earning less, you have less to spend on a campaign. But I think the fundraising point is actually really interesting, because if we look at fundraising as a, kind of a professional level, it's 75% of like the members of the Association of Fundraising Professionals in North America are actually women. And so we know women can fundraise and do it quite a bit, but I think what I observed at least is it feels like that it's different asking for money for an organization or for a cause versus for yourself. And so we've had a number of great guest speakers, Catherine O'Neill actually being one of them, who organized this, supported with organizing this today, but around how can you get over that, and what do you need to do instead? So some of the tips that we heard were around, highlighting why are you in the race? And so it's not that you're voting for somebody because they're going to do X and Y. And so do you care about these issues? If so, you can donate. And then also being really clear on how that donation will support the campaign. What exactly is it going to get you? It's going to get you lawn signs, it's going to feed volunteers, it's going to do this, to make it a little bit clearer. But it really comes down to it's what it seemed like it comes down to is you just have to get out there and do it. And the first few times that you do it, you're going to feel a little bit awkward and it's going to be challenging. And then you get the run of it and you're able to do that. So I think that is, it's certainly a barrier, but I think similar to the self-doubt one, it's more in our heads.
It's a surmountable barrier.
Yes.
One thing I think a lot about these days covering politics and watching social media is how awful it can be out there on social media for politicians, and especially for women politicians and women public figures. Have you found any good workarounds or any good solutions for the type of harassment women in politics might have to go through?
Yeah, so it's definitely worse, the harassment that women face. There were a couple studies that came out of the States around this, and they looked at the last congressional races in 2020, and they saw, female candidates were significantly more likely to receive online abuse. For female Democrats, they were like 10 times more likely than male Democrats to receive like hateful messages online, and the intensity of those messages was different. So, the language used, the harshness was a lot worse for what the women receive. So it's certainly a real problem, and it makes sense that people have that concern. The workarounds that we heard were really focused on, so during your campaign and if you're elected, is as much as possible having somebody else able to be monitoring and managing your social media, so that you're not the one who has to go in and filter through the comments to see which ones are genuine questions and which ones are, you know, positive things that you may want to hear and which ones are just really coming from a place of hate and not something that you want to engage with. So that was the big tip that we heard. I think one other dimension that I find about the online harassment and kind of in person as well is something I've heard from women, but not from men, is not that they're just worried about like the harassment that I'm going to face, but what does that mean for my partner, or for my kids? Are they going to hear this from kids at school? And so I think that's another interesting thing that women think about a little bit more than men, and may prevent them from stepping forward. I know Parity YYC up in Edmonton, they've partnered with an organization as well that's called the Parity Bot. And I don't know a ton about it, but it basically goes and tries to respond with positive messages to counteract some of that negative hate. So there are some things out there, but I do think the social media is a huge challenge. So having somebody else able to look at that and manage that can go a long way.
And we're starting to get some questions from viewers right now. And one of them, the first question is, and this could go to Asia or Helen, do you think we are, quote, harder, more critical on women in politics than men? Helen, do you want to try that one first?
Yeah, I'll try.
Yeah.
I mean, I do think so. I think just anecdotally, I think that's what we see. I think also there's additional pressure that women face if there's only a few women in the room, as having to not just be a representative of yourself and the issues, but you're sort of seen as the representative of all women, which I think puts some additional pressure on and leads to there being more of that kind of behavior.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, I mean, the scrutiny, even from the newspaper articles we've gone through to discover our research about the history of the women who have served on council, the scrutiny that some of the women were put under, like to Helen's point earlier, what are your qualifications? Why do you think this is needed? Why should we pick you? Whereas the men, especially the incumbents, were just kind of like, oh, and you know this guy. Oh yeah, he's fine. Like, it's great. You know, he's a lawyer, he's a judge, he's an engineer, he's awesome, like whatever. So the endorsement, the kind of unspoken endorsement, I suppose, that, you know, like he can be trusted, he's fine. Whereas this woman, like, what are you doing here? Why do you feel like you should be at the table with these other people? So that has definitely carried on from the past. And I think we're definitely have historically been harder on women who have been, you know, running in the running to serve at council, but also definitely currently, for sure.
One thing I think about related to that is how so many of us in the past have had an image of what a male politician looks like, a guy in a suit and tie, whereas how do people visualize a woman leader or a woman politician? What does she look like? And because we're in such a society that focuses on visuals, I think that's a big thing that people have a hard time picturing a woman leader and an idea of what that means. And of course, it can mean all different things. So we have another question for Asia, and that is, who was the longest serving woman member of City Council?
Good question. Yeah, that honor goes to Barb Scott. She served 24 years on council from 1971 to 1995. So she was elected several times. I think it was 8 in total, but definitely the longest time on council at 24 years. However, the current councillors, our current boss lady councillors who are in council right now, very closely follow her record. So Councillor Diane Colley-Urquhart has served for 21 years, and Councillor Drew Farrell, who will be retiring this year, has served for 20. So Diane Colley-Urquhart will likely take over that record should she be reelected this autumn.
Wow. And we have another very interesting question. You know, what I've wondered about too, Sue Higgins was nicknamed the Alder Broad when she was on council. Was that a nickname she came up with, or did it come from the media?
That's a good question. I've seen that thrown around several times, and Sue Higgins was like, hard old broad. She definitely earned that name, and I think she might be one of the first people to like claim that as her own. I'm not sure though if it was the media who originally gave it to her and she sort of like took it on, or if it was something, you know, it could have even been a fellow counselor, for heaven's sake, who would have called her that at some point in council, and she just wore the moniker with pride from then on. And you know what, given what I know about her just generally through my research, she very well could have assigned it to herself, but I love it. It's a great little nickname.
Well, it's interesting, and it's a good reminder that, and you might know the year that this changed, that it was Calgary was not only a few years ago changed the name from alderman to councillor. Do you know what year that was?
Yeah, that was on December 14th, 2010. Council voted to change that title, from alderman to council, and the change took effect in the 2013 election. So Drew Farrell and Diane Collier-Card and several other female councillors who we haven't spoken about were called aldermen when they were when they were elected. And it was funny. One of the things back from Annie Gale's time was like, well, what will we call these women who are on council? We couldn't possibly call them aldermen. Like that was one of the things where they were like, well, maybe we just shouldn't have women here because what on earth will we call them?
And I don't know if you know this, was Calgary one of the last cities to change on that front in Canada, or am I remembering that correctly?
Well, 2013 is pretty late when it's officially changed. If they voted 2010 but officially changed 2013, I would hazard to guess that we were probably one of the later municipalities to make that shift.
And I do wonder, you know, as we see women running for the office of mayor this year, you know, whether it's easier for people to imagine having women councillors on city council than a mayor. Do you think there's any resistance that people have for voting for a woman for the top spot as opposed to on council in general?
Well, again, you know, there have been women on council before, so you know we do see that that has happened already, and it has been done very successfully. So there's really nothing to prove, right? But the mayor's seat, for whatever reason, has been just avoided here in Calgary, and not for lack of trying. There have been women who have run for mayor before, have just been unsuccessful in it. That's going to be our next level of research, actually, is getting into the stories of the women who have run and, you know, getting into their background as well. Because, you know, we talk about leadership, it's not just council and mayor as well, right? There's other aspects of leadership at a city. And to Helen's point, what she said earlier, these qualified women who never did make it, right? I'd like to start learning more about them as well. But having a woman in the mayor spot might be different in Edmonton. It might be a little bit more easy for people to kind of imagine that because it has already happened. I personally don't think that it should be a problem. We have some extremely eligible women running for mayor this time around, and who have proven themselves already at a municipal council level. And so I would highly encourage people to put that aside and look at the qualifications and look at their background and really be like, this, even to Helen's point earlier, maybe it's time to give the people who deserve that position that position. So,
right, and then that leads me to another question from viewers, and that's how can we best support women candidates in the coming election? Maybe I'll let Helen take the lead on this one.
Yeah, so I mean, I think some of the best ways to do that is to look at who's running in your ward and check to see if there are women who have values that align with yours. I mean, reach out to the campaign. I know there's a number of women who are looking for more volunteers on their campaign. As we mentioned, like fundraising can be a barrier. So if you're able to, you know, donate to a woman candidate, vote for a woman candidate when it actually comes to election day. I have this large elect her sign behind me because our organization is called Ask Her, but you know, our ultimate goal is for that representation on council. So, you know, actually cast that ballot that way and show your support publicly too in your networks, you know, by getting a sign, just talking to folks about why you think this person is super qualified. Can go a long way. And I know there are a number of women who are considering running, who are running, who are here. today. And so, I mean, if there's anything specific that they'd like, I would encourage them to drop that in the chat as well, on what they're facing. So.
Helen, one issue I have been thinking a lot about recently with the federal government talking about a universal childcare program is that barrier for women. Often we talk about, I think up until very recently, we would ask a woman, how she plans to balance it all if she has children or young children, whereas we would never ask a male candidate the same thing, of course. How important is that childcare piece?
Yeah, so I mean, super important to echo what you were saying. I mean, we were doing a campaign school with Equal Voice last week, and we had a panel, and that was actually one of the things that a lot of the women shared, was that when they went door knocking, you would inevitably get the question, and this isn't, this isn't historical, this is the last election 4 years ago, of, okay, well, if you're running, who's going to be watching your kids? So it's definitely a question that still comes up, and I think women have jokingly responded, well, like, I'm not going to leave them unattended. Someone will be watching them. But I think that's a question we see more, and childcare just would go such a long way in ensuring that women from all socioeconomic backgrounds are able to run, because that's a huge expense. And so if you're going to be going into a job, and municipal is a little bit better because it doesn't have the travel that provincial and federally necessarily can, but there's still it's still, you need to be able to have reliable and affordable childcare, and especially during the campaign period. So I think it's super important to removing some of those barriers, and those barriers that may impact different women differently. So
yeah, there's also the added question about what happens if women have children while they're in a public office, right? I mean, very recently, there's an MLA in whose name is escaping me now, but an MLA in Saskatchewan who's really kind of spearheaded this. I follow her on Twitter, and she's fantastic. She's given birth, she's back in the house, she's still able to be there and doing her job during a pandemic, for heaven's sake. So there's that kind of question as well that I think might be the next step in this, beyond the childcare question, that we should be, reckoning with and have a better answer for.
Yeah, and how to make it more accessible as well for women to participate with their families. So I know, is there an option? One of the things we found super helpful with our programs was actually the virtual was really helpful, because it meant that if you are doing, childcare stuff and you're there with your family, you can just turn your video off, step away for a few minutes, and then come back. It's not like you're, 20 minutes away in a facility need to sort out all of those logistics. Or I think the Alberta legislature, there was a woman who had I think also maybe gave birth in office, or had a very young child, and was able to bring her into the chamber and have her with her. So seeing if there's ways as well to make politics more accessible, eliminating meetings and stuff that are happening in the evening, like all of that can go a long way. And I see there's a great comment in the chat of like, it's not just women that this impacts, it's also impacting men, as we see men and women more evenly sharing domestic responsibilities. So I think it's good for everybody.
Another question from the audience: in wards where more than one woman is running, how do you feel about some candidates being asked to step down to increase the chances of the stronger candidate or woman running? I don't know if this is a real life example or theoretical example, but we know this does happen in politics, for the good and the bad, for certain. Any thoughts there?
I think we don't ask that of men. And so I would say that it's better. I think it's better to have more women running, so that you can see that there's different women who run with different qualifications, and also who may have different, be on completely different sides of the political spectrum or on different issues. And so I think that we should be encouraging, more women to run, so that folks are able to see there's a woman candidate that I support who aligns with my values, as opposed to just, I'm going to vote for somebody because she's a woman. And we see right now only about 25% of the candidates who are running are women. And so I think, it would almost be like a step backwards to reduce that, because then you're fighting even worse odds. So I think anyone who feels qualified should put their hat in the ring for sure.
Yeah. And even historically, the women who have run in the past, I mentioned quite a bit championed women's issues with major quotes around that, guys, of healthcare, child education, bettering, community services, things like that. But not all women were doing that. A lot of women did not support the extension of public transportation. A lot of women wanted to see expanded travel corridors for cars so they could get in and out of the city faster, right? There, to Helen's point, there's multiple sides of the spectrum, and women won't always align with what you might imagine that they would be supporting. So yeah, get in there, read about them, learn about their platforms, and find somebody who you can align with, because if you look, they are there.
These are good points all, and I've learned so much today. I feel like I just got a little crash course in municipal politics, one that I really needed. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Sithara for the goodbyes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. On behalf of YWCA Edmonton and the Searching for Izena project, I'd like to thank Kelly, our moderator, and our two very distinguished panelists, Asia and Helen, for your time, your wisdom, and your insights. The conversation was very inspiring, and I'm sure everyone here learned a lot about the history of female leadership at Calgary and how it can look shaping into the future. So we've seen a lot of progress, and as we know, there's still so much work to do. I am 19, so this is the first election year for me where I get to cast my vote. So I'm excited to hopefully elect women into my municipal government. So lastly, thank you to everyone at home joining us today. We really appreciate you being here, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of your week. Please stay in touch with us by visiting the YWCA Edmonton website or searching for Izena.com. You can also follow the conversation on social media. The hashtag searching for Izena is very active and dynamic on Twitter, so we'd love to include you in that conversation. And we support your support. We appreciate your support and your interest. And together, we know that we can all make more women elected into decision-making tables across our province, because representation does truly matter. In order to build stronger, healthier, and more equal communities, it's important that the people that are at those tables look, talk, and think like the people that they serve. So thank you. Have a great day. Thank you again for watching, and please reach out to us for any information. Thank you.